Hello and welcome to my channel. In this one I'm going to do a charcoal portrait of JRR Tolkien, the famous author of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. I'm also going to show you a few useful tricks that you can use when you're trying to draw a complex portrait such as this one. I'm going to show you how you can start off with a good sketch, how you can draw these white hairs even when they're in the shadow, how you can draw the smoke coming from the pipe, and how you can make use of some mixed media. So let's start. We're going to start off with a sketch, but let me just go over the materials real quick. The reference is going to be in the description. I'm working on a Fabriano drawing paper about 9 × 12 inches in size, and I'm going to work with Master's Touch woodless charcoal pencils and some willow charcoal and some other stuff. Now, as for the initial sketch, a lot of people often ask me about this, but this is the easiest way to do it. I use a little bit of tracing. I just put a piece of paper against a computer screen like so, and then I work over that, trying to make some kind of an initial rough sketch. After that, I just go and put in some additional detail using freehand, because there's only so much you can see through the paper. It doesn't have to be perfect, and it usually isn't, but it's good enough to get things started. I think that tracing is a very useful method for modern artists, because we often have to produce several drawings every week, and that's quite a pace. So tracing is a quick and easy method to start things off. Of course, when you have a bunch of lines, that's just the beginning. In order to make it look three-dimensional, you need shading and you need value contrast, which is what we're getting to now. First, I'm going to start shading the background, and I'm going to use this piece of willow charcoal. The willow charcoal is soft natural charcoal that I'm going to use to cover large areas, and I'm going to be adding some other stuff to the background, but I'm going to start with this one. It's very easy to modify it if you want to make it darker or lighter, if you want to erase it and stuff like that. But the reason why I want the background to be darker here is because now I want to establish the contrast with the main subject. So the top part, the top of the head especially, will be a lot lighter because of the light source and because of his white hair. And with the darker background, the main subject will stand out because of that contrast. So first I went around the edges, because with this charcoal stick I can draw around the edges pretty easily, but I can also cover large areas very easily. Now when I cover enough of it, and I'm mostly going to cover the top and the left part for now, I'm going to add a little bit of the charcoal powder from one of my charcoal pencils. This is compressed charcoal and it's a little bit darker. And if we try to blend it like this, we'll see that it blends very well. Mostly because the charcoal powder in general blends well, but also the vine charcoal, the willow charcoal, tends to blend pretty well even when you're using your fingers, and there tends to be very little texture. But willow charcoal alone is a little bit too light. That's why I added some charcoal powder, and that's why I decided to push it in with my finger to make the background a little bit darker. And sometimes, of course, you have to rotate the drawing in order to be able to go around the edges efficiently without smudging over them too much. So most of the blending in the background will be done with the fingers. Anyway, I'm cleaning up the edges a little bit, and now I'm going to do just a little bit more of the background. The reason why I'm working on the background so gradually is because I want to minimize the smudging. So the thing is that if you're right-handed like me, you're going to want to work from left to right and from top to bottom. And I will tend to avoid doing too much of the background. But here I think it's safe to do a little bit more of the background here to the right at the top. And I also went around the right edge of his head and here just to give myself an indication about the general shape there. Anyway, now I'm going to start working on the details, and for that, naturally, I need a charcoal pencil. So like I said, these are Master's Touch woodless charcoal pencils. They can be sharpened pretty well. As you can see, I can use them to draw even some of the smaller, finer details. But this is not the only pencil I'm going to use. I have another trick up my sleeve, which I'm going to share with you a little bit later. So right now I'm trying to tackle these eyebrows. They're a little bit tricky because they have gray hairs in them themselves, but there's also a little bit of shadow under them, so they need to be darker, a little bit darker than the rest of the forehead area. And I zoomed in a little bit closer so that you can see some of these details. I'm drawing the eyes, and I'm trying to get as much detail as possible based on what I see from the reference, which isn't of the greatest quality, but it's going to be good enough. Once again, the reference will be in the description. It's one of the old famous photos of Tolkien smoking his pipe. Anyway, just drawing some of these wrinkles and darker shapes around the eyes and the nose and the mouth. Some artists like to start by shading larger areas, and I often do that myself. But here, because I already have a sketch in place, I don't want to work over that entirely. I am going to work on top of that with a charcoal pencil just to make sure that I know where those darker lines are going to be, and then I'm going to do some shading of the larger areas where I will establish those larger, more important contrasts. But the details will still be in place, and I can always go back and refine them a bit later, add some more. So once again, the initial sketch was obtained by tracing. Some people don't like tracing. I often use freehand. In fact, most of the time I use freehand. But when it comes to portraits, the tricky thing is that you need to worry about the proportions, and sometimes you just want to be sure that everything is in the right place. And when you don't have much time, which is often the case with modern artists, you just want to be able to get things started as quick as possible. Anyway, I am drawing this shadow or area or transition between the hair and the forehead, where the roots of the hair are, and I'm shading that very gently, making some indications of the shape of the hair and the way it's combed back. That's because that's going to be very light. Those are going to be very light values. That's why I'm barely touching the paper with this piece of willow charcoal, and as you will see, once I blend that, I will get areas of very light value, because willow charcoal doesn't really stick to the surface of the paper. It kind of sits there, and you're able to move it around. So now I'm going to push in a little bit more of that charcoal dust onto this part of the hair here on the sides of the head. The reason why I need more value there is because the top of the head is facing the light source coming from above, and it's going to be the lightest. Whatever is facing away from the light source or is further away from the light source is going to be darker. So now I'm going to put down a little bit of value on some areas of the face which need to be a bit darker. So I'm just going to shade a little bit with this piece of willow charcoal, and at one point it's probably going to seem like I'm ruining it entirely, but I won't be ruining it because, as I've already explained, willow charcoal is very easy to manipulate. So I can just blend it like this, and the ugly lines and the textures disappear, and I will be working on top of that and refining that anyway. I can always add a little bit more value in some areas which need more shadow, and also I can use an eraser and lift up a little bit of charcoal or erase a bit of charcoal to create areas of lighter value. So I will be going back and forth with these tools, the erasers and the drawing tools in order to achieve the shapes that I want. Right now, as you can see, we still have some lines, and I still haven't started really, actually I have started, but I haven't really managed to define the shape of the face properly. That needs a lot more time and a lot more shading. But as I keep shading and as I keep establishing that value contrast in different parts of the face, three-dimensional shapes will begin to appear. There's a little bit more shadow here between the teeth and the pipe. And now I'm going to go back in and refine some of these smaller details, which I did initially, but then I shaded over them and I worked with a brush on top of them. So maybe some of them got a little bit smudged. Maybe I realized that some of them need to be a little bit bigger or a little bit darker. So I'm just going back in and refining some of the smaller shapes like the eyes, the eyelashes, the wrinkles around the eyes, and things like that. For blending, I often use brushes. For the background, I use my fingers, but for the blending on the face, I mostly use brushes, and two types, mostly harder bristle brush and a soft synthetic brush. They behave a little bit differently, so I like to use both of them. And now on to the second trick that I wanted to share with you. I'm actually starting to work a little bit with a black colored pencil. This is a harder pencil that has a finer tip and can draw finer details and finer textures. In many of my charcoal drawings, I like to use at least a little bit of black colored pencil. A black colored pencil gives me precision when I want some smaller details, but it can also produce some really fine looking textures that I wouldn't really be able to produce with a charcoal pencil, because a charcoal pencil has a tendency to create a rougher texture or to get too dark. Here, as you can see, as I'm gently moving the black colored pencil on top of these lighter areas, I can make them just a little bit darker and give them a little bit of texture so that it looks a little bit more complex, like the surface of the skin, so that it's not just completely smooth. I can create that illusion of detail which is needed in portraits to make them, to attract the attention of the viewer and make them feel like you've put in a lot of work into drawing the skin and wrinkles and all of these things. But I like to combine black colored pencils with charcoal pencils. You can also use a graphite pencil, but that wouldn't work quite as well because graphite pencils are a lot lighter than charcoal, and the graphite is a lubricant, so it's not that easy to combine the two. Now the graphite pencils that work a little bit better with charcoal are the Faber-Castell matte graphite pencils, because they're more matte, they're a bit darker, but I prefer a black colored pencil. As you can see, now I'm drawing some lighter hairs at the top by pulling these lighter strokes with a pencil eraser. This is a Kohinoor pencil eraser. It gives me a lot of precision and it's very convenient. I can use it as I would a pencil. I can just draw white lines instead of the black line or darker lines with it, and I can refine the shape of the hair at the top. I can do the same thing with the eyebrows here as well, draw some lighter details in there, make the eyebrows a little bit bushier and a little bit whiter. And of course I can always go back in with a black colored pencil and go around the edges, refine them a little bit, clean them up, because I do need a very clean edge and a nice contrast between the main subject and the background. So now I've pretty much covered most of the tools that I'm using, and I'm just going to keep refining the details on the face. As you can see, every now and then I will use this black colored pencil. That's the one that I have now in the pencil holder. I will use it to draw some of these lighter wrinkles and smaller details which require a little bit more precision and which need to be of lighter value, and I will just shade lighter areas, go over them gently with this black colored pencil, producing a fine texture that can be interpreted to be the surface of the skin. There's a little bit of shadow here under the nose and also in the eye socket area, so I'm going back in and adding details and shadows where needed, and also refining the shape of the nose a little bit. I don't want the nose to look too big, although it is a little bit bigger. And I also cleaned up that edge between the mouth and the background, and now I think that part of the face really stands out nicely against the background because of that strong contrast. Now I'm going to move on to drawing the hair on the right. I'm starting by adding some of these darker areas around the ear and on the sideburns. And the gray hair or the white hair is pretty much like any other hair. You can't draw every single hair, but you rather want to try to divide it into segments and create an illusion of the density and the volume of the hair. And to do that, you will have to use brushes. So I put down some of those shadow areas, some indications of the shape of the hair and the way that it is combed, and did some blending. And now I'm pulling some lighter details using a pencil eraser. These lighter details are supposed to be the individual hairs or groups or segments of hair which are standing out and which are catching more light from the light source. Now, one of the very important things to remember while I'm doing this, and this is the next tip or trick that I need to tell you about, is that even though I know the hair is white, the hair here on the sides is darker than at the top because of the shadow. The top is catching the most light, so I always have to remember this relationship, this relationship between the areas of lighter and darker value, which is why I'm going over that now gently with a brush, pushing on a little bit of charcoal dust on top of that, so that I can make sure that even the lightest hairs in the shadow area remain darker than the light hairs at the top. Because we always need to keep in mind where the light side is and where the part of the body which is facing the light source and which is catching the most light is located. Everything that is in the shadow, even though it's white, can't be completely white. It needs to have a little bit of white, it needs to have a little bit of shadow on it. So that's important to remember, regardless of what it is that you're shading. Anyway, cleaning up the edges of that pipe so that the shape looks a little bit more smooth and a bit more realistic, and so that I have more contrast between the background and the pipe. Just making sure that I have a nice clean edge there. I'm kind of struggling a little bit to clean that up. And now I'm going to draw the smoke. This is an interesting effect that may seem a little bit daunting at first, but it's actually not that difficult if you have the right tools and if you know how to use them. So I'm going to start off with this pencil eraser. I'm just dragging it to create some shapes that look like a thin column of smoke coming from that pipe. It's kind of curling and twisting every which way, the way it does in the reference photo. However, what you need to understand is that you can't really draw all of it just by using this pencil eraser. There's only so much you can accomplish with it because it mostly draws lines, but when you drag it, it draws slightly softer, blurrier lines. But there's another tool which we're going to use for erasing, which will help us to make this smoke look a lot more realistic. But for now I'm working with this pencil. The idea is to create these light shapes against the darker background by removing the charcoal with erasers or other means, and that way we'll end up with something that looks like smoke against that darker background. Now I'm going to use a brush. A brush can also be used for erasing, believe it or not. You clean up the tip a little bit and then you lift up a little bit of charcoal. You clean up the tip and you lift up a little bit of charcoal, and you get some nice lighter wispy shapes This technique can be used when you're drawing clouds, when you're drawing smoke, anything that needs to be a little bit lighter, but you don't want to create such a distinct, clean shape like you would with a pencil eraser. You just want to lift up a little bit of value, and you want to create some softer, lighter shapes like the smoke is dispersing in some places. So by using a combination of these two tools, as you can see, I think you can get a very nice realistic looking smoke. Anyway, we're continuing with the shading of the face. Now, as you can see, I'm working on this area under the nose, and because the nose is a little bit larger and because the light source is coming from above, the nose is going to be casting quite a bit of shadow onto the area above the upper lip. And it looks like this part of the face kind of bends inwards a little bit, so it needs to be even darker. And of course, between the cheeks and the mouth there's going to be a little bit of shadow. I'm just going in and making sure that I have enough value in different places, just going over some of these areas with a black colored pencil again. So throughout the drawing process, you'll see me switching back and forth with between a charcoal pencil and a black colored pencil. For shading, my main drawing tools initially were the piece of willow charcoal and the charcoal pencil, but as you can see, the more I start working on the face, the more I will be using the black colored pencil in addition to the charcoal pencil. I'm going to do a little bit of work on his coat, whatever it is. This is mostly darker. I just need to make sure that I leave some lighter areas for some of the lighter folds which are exposed to the light source. The rest of it is going to be shaded with a substantial amount of value, almost black but not quite, and I'm going to do that with a medium charcoal pencil. By the way, I have two grades of these charcoal pencils, the soft and the medium. For this one I barely used the soft charcoal pencil at all. I found the medium mostly did the trick when it came to those deeper and darker values, because one of the things that I didn't want to do that is a little bit different than the references, because I felt like the face and the hair would be a little bit too light in comparison to the coat and the rest of his clothes. So as you will see, I decided to make those darker areas on the coat a little bit lighter. Anyway, doing some more shading on the face and just trying to get the shape of the chin and the lower jaw area to look closer to what it is in the reference. I'm also using a brush here to shade larger areas a little bit more quickly. Whenever I feel like I can shade some of the larger areas just by pushing some charcoal dust onto them with a brush, I try to do that because it makes the blending process easier and quicker. But of course that's usually not enough on its own. I always have to use a combination of a pencil and a brush. I added some details on the ear and did a little bit of light shading, because I want to add some details to this part of the head as well. And the main reason why I want to do that is because I want to know how much value there's going to be on this right side of the face and on the on the ear so that I would know how I would shade the rest of the hair. I still feel like this cheek and the cheekbone area needs a little bit more shading. I need to make sure that this lower part of the face, which is further away from the light source, is a little bit darker. And I'm also going to try to make it a little bit more rough in terms of texture. And there also needs to be a little bit more shading or a little bit more value around these wrinkles so that they look a bit more three-dimensional. So I'm going in and reworking them a bit. Because you can't really have just a bunch of lines on your portrait. Every line needs to mean something. And we need to explain to the viewer what is casting a shadow onto what. It's the same thing with these cheeks and with all the wrinkles around them. The pipe is also casting a little bit of shadow on the chin. As you can see, I try to capture that as well. Every time you can capture these smaller shadows which show that one object is on top of the other, that's very important to capture because that'll make everything look more three-dimensional. Now I'm just shading this right side of the head and the face because I want to make the whole thing a bit more three-dimensional. I don't want it to end up looking flat, so I keep pushing myself to see where the darker areas are, where the shadow areas are. I keep pushing myself to add more value to them. And of course I'm doing a lot of that work with a black colored pencil because it produces some very nice lines, smaller, finer lines and finer textures. Because I'm trying to imitate the appearance of that ruffled skin and some tiny wrinkles that I couldn't really draw one by one. I can just sometimes produce a similar texture by dragging the pencil and allowing it to create that illusion of detail. Now I'm going back to the ear area and adding some more details to it and around it. I'm going to refine the shape of the earlobe a little bit better. First I worked with a charcoal pencil and some brushes, and now I'm back to working a black colored pencil. I have to tell you that I do a lot of commission portraits, by the way, and in the vast majority of my commission portraits, which are black and white, I work with mixed media. I usually use either those Faber-Castell matte graphite pencils in combination with charcoal and a black colored pencil, or I use a combination of charcoal and a black colored pencil. But it's never charcoal alone, it's always charcoal as something else. I think that some people would probably prefer videos and tutorials in just one medium, but the truth is that I just like the fact that I can use a couple of different types of pencils. It's more convenient that way, just like I liked using different types of blending tools or erasing tools. I could never use just a kneaded eraser or just a pencil eraser. I like to use them both. Similarly with blending tools, I could never use just Totilians or just brushes. I like to use my fingers, Totilians, brushes, all kinds of tools. And it's the same thing with the drawing tools. I like to use several forms of charcoal, but I also like to throw in some other pencils which can produce effects which I can't really produce with charcoal, or maybe I can produce certain effects with these pencils easier than I would be able to do them with charcoal. So, you know, if you can take advantage of using the mixed media even when you're doing a black and white drawing, I say why not? Most of my black and white portraits are in fact mixed media and have been so consistently over the last, I don't know, 7 or 8 years probably. Only in the beginning I worked mostly with graphite, and then I worked mostly in charcoal, but very soon I started mixing things up a little bit, and I found that it's just easier and better that way. So this part of the coat, the collar area, is a little bit darker in the reference. I made it a little bit lighter here, and I also use that charcoal residue, that dust, to push it onto the face to make the face a little bit darker, because that's called value interaction. When you draw something really dark next to something lighter, the lighter area ends up looking a little bit too flat. So I want to avoid that, so I pushed on a little bit of that charcoal onto the shadow sides of the face to make them a little bit darker. I smoothed out some areas of the background so that they wouldn't be too distracting. I do want a little bit of variation in the background, but not too much. I want it simple for the most part. And I am adding some flyaway lighter hairs here on the right side, cleaning up the edge of some parts of the coat as well so that it stands out against the background, adding some more shadow under the ear area on this part of the collar area, which is facing away from the light source, and maybe there's going to be some shadow coming from the head as well. Now I'm going to shade the rest of the coat here at the bottom on the right, just refining some parts, different parts of the portrait here and there, and cleaning up the shape of the chin area, and softening some of these ugly areas which have a little bit too much texture. I'm just going to go back in with a charcoal pencil and to try to get a nicer looking texture, and also to clean up some of the edges with a pencil eraser where I can, so that I could retain that contrast between the main subject and the background. I'm pretty much finished here. I put my signature in the lower right corner. I lost a little bit of footage there when I finished drawing the rest of his coat in the bottom right section of the drawing. My camera died on me. That happens every now and then. I'm just going to add a little bit more value here and do a little bit more refining, but as you can see I'm mostly done. I hope you like the portrait. Now you will mostly see relatively short videos here on YouTube. This one is a half an hour long. The entire process was around 2 hours. So this is not a short video by any means, but if you want to see much longer videos and more content, if you want to see full-length narrated videos and real-time footage, you can see that on my Patreon. So you might want to check that out. As for the YouTube channel, don't forget to check out my other videos. I have lots of portraits and other drawings in charcoal, and I hope that you'll like those as well. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm just putting down some finishing touches, doing a little bit more shading around the eyes. So let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'm gonna see you in the next one. Bye for now.